Airports had a rhythm of their own, voices echoing, heels clacking, engines roaring in the distance. At Dallas-Fort Worth International, the late afternoon rush looked like a well-rehearsed performance of chaos. Everyone moved with purpose, business travelers scanning phones, families juggling luggage, soldiers hugging loved ones before departure. Amid all that motion, Warner hurried toward Gate C-19, her boarding pass for Flight 274 to Seattle crumpled in her hand. She was exhausted, emotionally more than physically. Her new life was waiting in Washington state, far from the city that held too many painful memories. She wanted a quiet seat, a long nap, and no interruptions. But fate had other plans. As she approached the gate, her eyes caught a small figure sitting alone near the window, a young boy, no older than 9. He was curled up on a seat, hugging a backpack and a tiny toy airplane, his shoes untied, his eyes fixed on the runway beyond the glass. Something about him made slow down. Children didn't usually travel alone, at least not this young. She looked around, no adults nearby, no one watching him. People passed without a glance. Hesitated, then walked closer. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, crouching beside him. "You waiting for someone?" The boy didn't move at first. He just blinked and clutched his toy. His voice, when it finally came, was small. "Dad's coming. He said he'd be back before the plane leaves." Felt her stomach tighten. His tone wasn't confident. It trembled with the kind of hope that comes from not wanting to believe the truth. "Is your dad on a flight?" she asked gently. He nodded. "He's a soldier. He said he'd come home today." The announcement crackled over the speakers. Final call for Flight 274 to Seattle. Passengers hurried past, glanced toward the gate agent. The door was still open, but not for long. "You waiting for your mom too?" asked. The boy shook his head. "She doesn't come anymore." His voice cracked. "She left." That word, "left," echoed in his chest like a punch. She'd heard it before, felt it sting herself. She looked toward the gate again. Logic told her to go. The flight was closing and she'd lose her ticket, but her instincts screamed something else, something stronger. She turned back to the boy. "Hey, do you know where your dad's flying into?" He hesitated, then said, "Seattle." The coincidence hit her, her destination. The gate agent called out again. "Last boarding for Seattle. Ms. Warner, are you boarding?" His pulse raced. Her mind spun between choices: get on the plane or stay and find out why this child was sitting alone in an airport terminal clutching a toy plane like a lifeline. She looked into his eyes again. They were tired but steady, eyes that had seen too much waiting, too much disappointment for someone so young. She took a slow breath. "All right," she whispered, "let's find someone to help you." The boy looked scared. "But what if Dad comes and I'm not here?" Gave a small, reassuring smile. "If he comes, he'll know where to find you, I promise." She walked toward the counter, holding the boy's hand. The gate agent frowned. "Ma'am, we're closing the flight." Looked over her shoulder at the plane preparing to taxi out. "Then close it," she said firmly. "I'm not leaving this kid alone." The agent exchanged looks with security, uncertain what to do. Within moments, 2 TSA officers approached. "Ma'am, what's going on?" "This boy's alone," explained quickly. "He says his father's a soldier returning from Seattle, but no one's here with him. Something's wrong." The older officer knelt in front of the boy. "What's your name, son?" "Tyler," the boy murmured. "Tyler." The officer looked up sharply. "Did you say?" Noticed his face change, serious, almost alarmed. "Yeah," she said cautiously. "Why?" He stood slowly. "Because Captain Daniel was reported missing in action 3 weeks ago." His breath caught in her throat. The entire world seemed to slow. She looked down at the boy again, his small hand gripping that toy plane, eyes still searching the sky. "Then," she whispered, her voice shaking, "who dropped him off here?" The officer didn't answer. He just turned toward security and muttered, "We need to see that surveillance footage. Now." Atmosphere in the security office felt heavier than the terminal's air. The whir of ceiling fans, the low murmur of radios, the faint scent of jet fuel, it all pressed in around. Tyler sat beside her, his tiny legs swinging, his toy airplane still locked in his grip. A security officer named Sergeant Miller leaned over the monitor, replaying grainy footage. "There," he said, pointing. "That's the man who dropped him." Moved closer. On the screen, a man in camouflage walked briskly beside Tyler, keeping his head down. The camera caught the edge of a military ID clipped to his shirt, but the face was hidden under a cap. "That doesn't look like his father," Miller muttered. "And there's no record of this drop-off, no authorization." Frowned. "You think someone just left him here?" Miller sighed. "It's more than that. Captain's name has been flagged since the military declared him missing. Whoever dropped this boy off used credentials they shouldn't have access to." Tyler spoke up quietly. "He said Daddy would find me here. He said to wait by the big window till the plane came in." Knelt beside him. "Did he tell you his name, sweetheart?" Tyler shook his head. "No, he had Dad's badge though, I saw it." That single line made Miller's radio hiss. "Dispatch, get military verification on Captain Daniels' ID," he ordered. Then turning to, "You said your flight was to Seattle, right?" "Yeah," replied, "Gate C-19. "Then listen carefully," Miller said, his voice tight. "Captain was stationed out of Joint Base Lewis Cord, just outside Seattle. That's the same route your plane is taking. We think whoever brought this kid may be trying to reach someone on that flight." His blood ran cold. "You mean someone?" He nodded grimly. "Or the pilot himself." A wave of confusion hit her. "Wait, you're saying the pilot could be Captain?" Miller exhaled. "That's impossible. Was declared MIA in Syria. If he's alive, the world doesn't know it yet." Tyler's small voice cut through the tension. "Daddy said he'd come home on a big plane, not like before." He looked down, twisting the toy between his fingers. "He said he'd see me soon." Placed a hand on his shoulder. "He will," she said softly, though doubt clawed at her chest. The intercom outside the office crackled. "Flight 274 is now departing for Seattle." His heart seized. "That's my flight." Miller cursed under his breath. "If that's connected to this, we can't let it take off." He grabbed the radio again. "Tower Control, this is DFW Security Command. Request immediate hold on Flight 274 pending child endangerment verification." Static, then a calm voice replied, "Hold request without formal cause. Aircraft is cleared for taxi." Felt the urgency rising like a storm tide. "You have a child here whose father is missing in action, and someone pretending to be him just abandoned him. How is that not cause?" Miller rubbed his forehead. "Because we need visual confirmation or threat verification. Without that, the FAA won't stop a jet full of passengers." Stood abruptly. "Then I'll give them one." She grabbed the boy's hand and walked straight toward the glass wall facing the runway. Her reflection stared back, nervous, trembling, but determined. She looked out and saw the plane moving slowly across the tarmac, the engines whirring like distant thunder. Tyler pressed his small palm to the glass. "That's the one," he whispered. "That's Daddy's plane." His voice shook. "If he's really on that plane, he needs to know his son's here." Miller stepped forward, alarmed. "Ma'am, what are you doing?" "Getting his attention," she said firmly. Before he could stop her, ran toward the main gate window and waved her arms, shouting for the ground crew to stop. Security guards rushed after her, but she didn't care. Her voice rose above the airport noise. "Stop the plane. There's a child waiting for the pilot." Passengers in the terminal turned, came out. A few people gasped as the massive aircraft slowed slightly on the taxiway. Miller barked into his radio. "Tower, hold that aircraft now." The control tower's lights flickered. "Command copy. Flight 274, pause movement, possible emergency." Froze, chest heaving. She turned to Tyler, who was staring through the window, tears filling his eyes. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then from the cockpit, a single figure appeared, headset on, face pale, eyes scanning the glass. And when his gaze fell on Tyler, the man's entire body went still. "Wait," Miller whispered, "is that?" Felt her breath catch. Because even through the thick glass, she could see it, the unmistakable shock in the pilot's eyes. He knew the boy. The terminal went eerily still, stood frozen near the glass as the jet on the runway slowed, its nose turning slightly toward the building. Ground crewmen exchanged confused looks. Inside the control room, alarms didn't sound, but hearts did. Captain Daniel, the man declared missing 3 weeks earlier, sat in that cockpit, alive, breathing, staring directly at the boy pressed against the window. In the observation office, Sergeant Miller's phone rang with a shrill urgency. He answered, "Security Command." Then his voice faltered. "What? Say that again." His eyes widened. "You're certain?" He hung up and turned toward. "We just got confirmation from the Department of Defense," he said slowly. Captain Daniel was extracted from a conflict zone in northern Syria 6 days ago. He was on medical transport. He wasn't supposed to be here. Blinked, then how? Miller cut her off, staring at the runway monitor. He's supposed to still be in Washington under observation. No civilian knew he'd been rescued. If he's piloting that plane, something doesn't line up. Turned to Tyler. "Sweetheart, are you sure your dad's a pilot?" Tyler nodded, his small fingers tracing the toy plane's wings. "He flies big ones. He said when I see his plane again, it means he's home." Miller's radio crackled. "Control tower to Security Command. The pilot of Flight 274 is refusing clearance to taxi. Says he recognizes a child on the terminal side. Name confirmation." The room froze. Miller grabbed the mic. "Control, verify Captain is the pilot." "Affirmative," came the voice. "Captain Daniel says he's declaring a temporary ground hold until he's requesting visual contact with the terminal team." Stared at Miller. "He's alive, and he's the one flying that plane." Miller looked torn between disbelief and duty. If that's true, he just breached 2 layers of military restriction by appearing on a commercial flight. But didn't care about protocols. She turned back toward the window. The boy was now standing, palms pressed against the glass, tears streaming down. "Daddy," Tyler shouted, "I knew you'd come." His breath hitched, her heart swelled and shattered all at once. She whispered he heard him. The pilot lifted a hand from the cockpit window, pressing his palm against the glass from the other side. Miles of air, concrete, and time separating them. Every traveler nearby stopped to watch. No one spoke. The airport, a place of constant motion, fell into stillness as if the entire world was holding its breath for one soldier and his son. Then the intercom rang again. "Captain is requesting immediate ground access. He wants to exit the aircraft." "That's against protocol," Miller muttered. "He can't just walk off a commercial flight." Turned to him sharply. "He's not thinking about protocol, he's thinking about his son." Miller rubbed his temples. "Ma'am, I understand, but this is federal airspace. We can't just let." The radio burst alive again. "Tower to ground, Captain is exiting the cockpit. Repeat, he's leaving the aircraft." "God help us," Miller whispered. Looked out and saw it through the terminal glass. The cockpit door swung open. The pilot stepped out, his uniform soaked in sweat, his movements unsteady but determined. He tossed aside his cap and started walking across the tarmac, ignoring ground crew yelling after him. "Sir, you can't leave the aircraft." But he didn't stop. The tower demanded radio confirmation. His co-pilot tried to follow but waved them off, eyes locked on one thing, his son's tiny figure inside the terminal. Pressed a hand to her heart. "He's really coming," she whispered. Tyler's eyes widened as the figure came closer, step by trembling step. "Daddy." Knelt beside him. "That's him, honey, that's really him." The automatic doors to the terminal slid open with a soft hiss. Stumbled in, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked on Tyler. And then he ran. Tyler dropped the toy plane and sprinted toward him. When their arms met, the sound that filled the air wasn't just crying. It was relief, disbelief, and love colliding all at once. The crowd erupted into gasps, applause, and tears. Even the toughest officers turned away, pretending to check their radios as their throats tightened. Stepped back, overwhelmed. Miller whispered beside her, "I've worked this job 22 years. I've seen soldiers return in coffins and on crutches, but never like this." Lifted his son, burying his face in the boy's hair. "I told you, buddy," he murmured. "I told you I'd come home." And through her tears finally understood, some promises survive even war. The terminal air seemed to thicken with every second. Officers' radios crackled like nervous lightning. Held Tyler's hand, her knuckles white, as they watched the massive jet sitting motionless on the taxiway. The engines hummed, vibrating through the floor, a reminder that the flight could depart at any moment. Captain Daniel had left the cockpit, and every eye in the airport followed him as he moved swiftly across the tarmac. The uniformed man's pace was deliberate, yet his body betrayed exhaustion. An invisible weight of weeks in conflict zones clung to him. "Ma'am," Sergeant Miller muttered, "he can't just enter the terminal. Federal law, FAA regulations, he's not cleared. This is unprecedented." Shook her head. "Forget the rules, look at that boy. He's waited his whole life for that man." Tyler squirmed in her grip, finally pointing through the glass. "Daddy, over here." His voice cracked, high and raw, carrying across the terminal, over the background murmur of passengers and airport announcements. His heart leapt. The sound of a child recognizing safety and love brought the hairs on her arms upright. She had never seen anything like it. The pilot froze for a heartbeat, eyes locking on his son. The boy's small body trembled with anticipation and felt an electric surge of hope pulse through her. A voice came over the intercom. "Captain, hold your position. Security protocols require verification before you approach the terminal. Please identify yourself." Ignored it, eyes fixed entirely on Tyler. "Tyler, buddy," he called softly, taking the final few steps toward the building. Every person watching could feel the weight of his presence. A soldier who had stared death in the face, now sprinting toward life's most precious prize. Inside the terminal, airport staff and passengers whispered among themselves, pulling out phones to capture the impossible. Bent slightly, her voice low, reassuring Tyler. "He's coming. This is really happening. Look at him." Tyler's small voice rose above the murmurs. "Daddy, don't stop." Outside's boots clanged against the concrete. Behind him, a group of military liaison officers sprinted to intercept, radios blaring. "Captain," one shouted, "you cannot." Waved them off, his tone firm but pained. "I know what I'm doing. My son is in there." The officers hesitated. Something about the scene, the boy's desperation, the crowd's hushed awe made them pause. One stepped forward, speaking urgently into his radio. "We need authorization. Now." Minutes stretched like hours. Every tick of the terminal clock felt like a drumbeat in his chest. Passengers leaned closer to the glass, captivated. Even the flight crew, watching from inside the grounded plane, whispered among themselves, shaken by the improbable reunion about to unfold. Reached the doors. The automatic sliding glass parted as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Stepped aside, letting Tyler's world collapse and rebuild in real time. The boy bolted, tiny legs carrying him with reckless speed. Dropped to his knees the moment Tyler reached him. Their embrace was seismic, shaking the air in the quiet terminal. Tyler buried his face against his father's chest, sobbing freely. Held him tight, whispering, "I'm here, I'm home, I promised." felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Around her, the crowd was silent, witnessing a miracle framed in ordinary airport chaos. The pilot, declared missing, had returned, guided by one child's unwavering belief and the bravery of a stranger who refused to walk away. Sergeant Miller exhaled slowly. "I don't even know what to say," he muttered, awed. Placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder, smiling softly. "You don't need to say anything. Sometimes just showing up is enough." Outside finally straightened, holding Tyler close. He turned his eyes to, sweat and tears mingling on his face. Then, in a gesture both formal and profoundly human, he raised his hand in a salute, not to her title or authority, but to the courage that had made this impossible moment possible. The terminal erupted, not with noise, but with the quiet reverence of those who had just witnessed an extraordinary act of love, patience, and instinct. His heart pounded. She realized in that instant that heroism didn't always come with medals or guns. Sometimes it came in the form of a civilian who refused to leave a child behind. And as Tyler clung to his father, she knew this 9-minute delay, this act of bravery, would change every life in that terminal forever. The automatic terminal doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the boy's small feet pounded against the tile. Every passenger in the terminal froze, some reaching for their phones, others unable to believe what was unfolding before them. Captain Daniel, the soldier declared missing, stumbled slightly, fatigue etched into every line of his face, yet his gaze never wavered. It locked on Tyler, his son, the child who had waited with unwavering hope for weeks. Stood aside, letting the scene unfold, her hands trembling. She could feel the electricity in the air, the tension between military rules, airline regulations, and the simple, undeniable power of love. Tyler launched himself into his father's arms, crying so hard it echoed off the terminal walls. "Daddy, I knew you'd come." His knees buckled under the weight of his son's small body. He wrapped him tight, burying his face in Tyler's hair. "I told you, buddy," he whispered, voice cracking with exhaustion and relief. "I told you I'd come home." Stepped back, letting the crowd witness a moment that protocol, logic, and reason. Officers lowered their radios, unsure whether to intervene or simply allow the miracle to continue. Passengers whispered, held their breath, and some wiped tears from their eyes. A woman seated near the terminal bar sobbed openly. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered to her friend. Her friend nodded, fingers clutching a phone, recording the moment for posterity. Miller, the security officer, looked pale but amazed. "I've worked here 20 years, he muttered. "I've stopped fights, intercepted threats, and never seen anything like this." Crouched slightly to Tyler's level. "See, buddy," she said softly. "He's here, you waited, and it worked." Tyler's sobs slowly quieted as he looked up with wide, tear-filled eyes. "You helped me." Smiled faintly. "Yeah, I just made sure you weren't alone." The terminal was silent except for the boy's soft sniffles and steady breathing, finally slowing. He finally stood upright, holding Tyler against his chest, both of them soaked in relief and awe. Then the pilot, now father, turned too. His uniform was wrinkled, sweat and tears mingling on his cheeks. Without hesitation, he raised his hand in a salute, formal and precise, yet charged with gratitude. Blinked back tears, unable to speak. The entire terminal seemed to exhale collectively, as if the weight of tension had been lifted by that simple, reverent gesture. Passengers began clapping, quietly at first, then louder, some even whistling. A young man on a layover whispered, "That's a real hero." Miller lowered his radio. "You did something impossible," he said too. "You didn't just stop a plane, you saved a family." Shook her head, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I just listened when no one else would." Outside finally looked down at his son, gently brushing the hair from Tyler's forehead. "No one's leaving you again," he promised. "I swear." Tyler nodded, exhausted, holding tight to his father's neck. "I waited like you said I should," he whispered. "And you were right," said softly, smiling through tears. "You were perfect." Stepped back, her role complete. She felt the kind of satisfaction that comes not from recognition or fame, but from knowing she had made a difference that truly mattered. The flight remained frozen on the tarmac, engines still humming, passengers waiting, all watching a story unfold that would live far beyond the terminal walls. In those 9 minutes, rules bent, hearts opened, and courage, ordinary courage, shaped an extraordinary reunion. And somewhere in that brief, miraculous time, realized that one simple act, refusing to leave a child alone, could change everything. The terminal hummed with a quiet intensity, the usual airport chaos replaced by an almost sacred stillness. Passengers who had moments before rushed past gate counters now stood frozen, eyes locked on a reunion that seemed to defy reality. Watched Tyler cling to his father, small arms wrapped tightly around his neck, and felt her heart pound. For the first time, she let herself fully exhale. The tension that had built over the last frantic 9 minutes evaporated into a heavy, emotional release. Captain, still holding his son, finally straightened. His uniform, wrinkled, streaked with sweat, could not hide the gravity in his eyes. He slowly turned toward who had been standing at a respectful distance, ensuring she didn't intrude on the father-son moment. Then he did something extraordinary. He raised his right hand in a formal military salute, precise and unyielding, a gesture of gratitude so pure it seemed to suspend the very air around them. Every passenger, every airport employee, every security officer felt the weight of that salute, an acknowledgement that her courage had changed lives. His breath caught. She didn't know whether to return it, cry, or run forward. Finally, with trembling fingers, she brought her hand to her chest in the closest equivalent. It was silent, but the language was universal. Respect, courage, heroism. The applause started slowly, hesitant at first, then swelling into a thunderous roar that reverberated through the terminal walls. Phones clicked and cameras recorded, capturing a moment destined to become legend. Some passengers wiped away tears, some laughed in disbelief, but all were witnesses to something rare, a civilian's bravery meeting a soldier's gratitude in perfect harmony. Sergeant Miller, standing nearby, shook his head. "I've seen war heroes return, celebrity events, medal ceremonies. Nothing compares to this. Nothing." Crouched slightly to Tyler's level. "See, buddy, it's all okay now." Tyler, still clinging to his father, looked up at her, eyes wide. "You helped me, really helped me." Forced a small smile. "I just made sure no one left you alone, Tyler, that's all." His voice, finally steady, carried across the terminal. "Ma'am," he said, addressing, "you didn't just make sure he wasn't alone. You stopped a plane, saved my son, and gave me the moment I've been praying for. I owe you everything." The crowd murmured in awe. The terminal, usually defined by schedules, departures, and arrivals, had transformed into a theater of raw human emotion. It was impossible to walk away unchanged. Outside, the flight crew watched through the windows, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The captain of Flight 274, who had remained calm through every radio call and regulation check, now looked visibly relieved. The flight, once ready to depart, was frozen in time, a testament to the impact of a single person's courage. Felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Sergeant Miller giving her a rare, approving smile. "You did what most people only dream of," he said. She shook her head, eyes moist. "I just listened when no one else did." Knelt again, brushing Tyler's hair back gently. "You waited for me," he said softly to his son. "And you weren't alone. You see, sometimes the world works in ways you can't predict, but courage, real courage, always finds a way." The terminal slowly returned to normal, but the energy remained charged. People whispered the story to each other, as though afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. Stood back, watching father and son disappear toward the exit, hand in hand. Her heart swelled, not with pride but with quiet satisfaction. Sometimes the most extraordinary moments came from the simplest acts, listening, waiting, and refusing to walk away. And in that moment, as Captain gave her a final, meaningful salute before stepping into Tyler's world once more, understood something profound. Heroism doesn't always come in uniform. Sometimes, it comes in the form of a civilian who refuses to abandon a child. The terminal erupted into applause once again, but this time, it wasn't just for the reunion. It was for the courage that made it possible. The terminal slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but for nothing felt normal. Every footstep, every murmur of passengers reminded her of the 9 minutes that had frozen time. 9 minutes in which she had made a choice that changed the course of a child's life and reunited a father with his son. Tyler clung to his father, his small hand wrapped tightly around Daniel's fingers. His face, now smeared with tears, bore a mix of exhaustion, relief, and disbelief. "I waited just like you said," he whispered softly. Knelt beside him, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "And you did it perfectly, buddy," he murmured. "I promised I'd come back and you believed. That belief saved us both." Watched silently, feeling a lump form in her throat. She had always known that courage could come in unexpected forms, but seeing it materialize so vividly, through a child's patience and a stranger's determination, was overwhelming. Said, voice quiet but commanding attention, "I owe you more than words can express. You didn't just help a child, you restored a family." Shook her head, looking down at Tyler. "I just made sure he wasn't alone, that's all." Smiled, a mixture of awe and gratitude in his eyes. "No," he said firmly. "You made a difference where it mattered most. Without you, I wouldn't have had these 9 minutes to see him again. You saved him from a lifetime of uncertainty." The crowd that had gathered slowly dispersed, some still whispering, others snapping photos and recording the extraordinary event. The story had already begun circulating through social media, capturing hearts across the nation. Didn't care about the cameras or the recognition. Her satisfaction was quieter, rooted in something deeper, knowing she had done what no one else had the courage to do. Sergeant Miller approached, shaking his head in disbelief. "Ma'am, I've seen a lot in my career," he admitted. "Military operations, emergencies, disasters, but nothing compares to this. You changed everything in 9 minutes." Smiled faintly. "Sometimes the simplest acts are the most important," she said. "I just listened." Outside the terminal, the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, painting the runway in shades of gold and crimson. It was as if the world itself acknowledged the extraordinary reunion taking place inside. Later, at a small airport, Tyler sat quietly. The boy leaned against his father, still processing the whirlwind of emotions. Glanced at, gratitude etched into every line of his face. "You could boarded that flight," he said softly. "Why didn't you?" His lips curved into a small smile. "Because no child deserves to be left waiting," she said. "Especially one who believes someone will come back. I just made sure someone did." Nodded, understanding more than words could convey. "That's bravery," he said. "Not in a battlefield, not in uniform, but the kind that changes, lives quietly, without recognition." Felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never thought of herself as a hero, just someone who listened. But seeing Tyler safe, seeing whole, she realized that sometimes courage wasn't about accolades. It was about showing up when it mattered most. Tyler yawned, exhausted, his small hand slipping into for a brief moment before returning to his father. "Thank you," he whispered. Kissed the top of his head. "You waited," she said softly, "and that made all the difference." In those quiet moments, the airport faded into the background. All that remained were 3 lives intertwined by fate, courage, and unwavering faith, lives forever changed by 9 extraordinary minutes. And somewhere deep inside, knew that while the world might celebrate the story, the real triumph was the bond forged by trust, hope, and the courage to act when it mattered most. 2 weeks had passed since that unforgettable day at Dallas-Fort Worth International. The story had gone viral, capturing hearts across the nation. A civilian stopping a flight, a missing soldier reunited with his son, and the courage it took to act in 9 critical minutes. News crews interviewed passengers, military officials, and even airport staff, but most wanted to hear directly from the woman who had refused to walk away. Sat quietly in a small, sunlit room at Fort Lewis, a modest space reserved for military ceremonies. Tyler clutched his toy plane in one hand, the other securely in his father's grasp. Daniel stood beside them, his uniform crisp, medals pinned, but none as significant as the gratitude in his eyes. The commanding officer stepped forward. "Today, we honor someone who represents the very best of courage," he began. "Someone who reminded us that heroism doesn't always wear a uniform, and that sometimes it's a civilian's moral courage that saves lives. Ms. Warner, please step forward." Rose, heart racing, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. Tyler tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, he whispered, "you did it." She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We all did it, buddy. You waited, I just stayed." The commanding officer handed a small, polished medal, the Civilian Valor Recognition Award, engraved with her name and the words, "For courage without rank, and for saving a life in critical moments." Captain stepped forward. His voice was steady, but his eyes glistened. He said, saluting her formally, "You didn't just save my son. You saved a father's chance to hold his child again. You acted with courage and heart where others hesitated. On behalf of every parent, every child, and every soldier who's ever prayed for a miracle, you have my eternal gratitude." Blinked back tears, unsure how to respond. She managed a small nod. I just listened," she whispered. Salute deepened, solemn and precise, echoing through the ceremony hall. Cameras clicked and broadcasted the moment nationwide. Across living rooms, classrooms, and offices, millions watched a civilian's courage meet a soldier's formal gratitude in a single, unforgettable gesture. Tyler tugged at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, she's a hero," he said softly. Knelt down to his son's level, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, buddy, but sometimes heroes are quiet, unexpected, and humble. That's what makes them powerful." Crouched beside Tyler, giving him a gentle hug. "Remember, waiting and believing mattered more than anything," she said. "Sometimes, courage is just showing up when it counts." The ceremony ended, but the story didn't. Media outlets replayed the salute, the reunion, and its bravery over and over. Social media hashtags trended. 9-minute hero, Warner, captain. People shared the story of hope, patience, and ordinary courage changing lives. For the recognition was secondary. The lasting reward was in Tyler's smile, the warmth of a reunited family, and the quiet knowledge that a single decision, refusing to walk away, had created a ripple of hope. Weeks later, she watched as Tyler and his father played catch in a nearby park. His uniform now replaced by casual clothes, but his gaze never left his son, protective and proud. Stood at the sidelines, a gentle smile on her face. A friend snapped a photo, but she didn't care. It wasn't about fame. It was about impact. And in that moment understood something profound. Sometimes the most heroic acts aren't broadcast, rewarded, or widely known. Sometimes they are small acts of courage that make the biggest difference. Tyler threw the ball, giggling, his toy plane tucked under one arm. Caught it, laughing along, and turned to with a nod that said more than words ever could. A salute, a moment of trust, a lifetime of gratitude. Smiled, watching the father and son she had helped reunite, knowing that her courage, quiet but unwavering, had created a story that would inspire for years to come. Sometimes heroes come in uniforms. Sometimes they come with boarding passes. And sometimes they are simply the ones who refuse to leave a child waiting. The sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the park in gold and crimson, echoing the airport's miracle that had started it all. And in that light felt, truly, that everything had landed exactly where it was meant to.